It was the dead of night, the highway nearly empty save for the occasional distant flash of headlights. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the quiet rhythm of tires on asphalt. The night was cool, the kind of night that made you feel small under the vast sky, yet the woman behind the wheel felt anything but small. She felt her nerves tangle in knots, her heart racing faster than the car she was driving. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white against the darkness of the interior. A quick glance at the rearview mirror made her stomach flip. Red and blue lights were flashing in the distance, the blaring sirens approaching steadily. Her heart dropped into her stomach, and her grip tightened further. Not now. Please, not now, she whispered under her breath. She wasn't worried about the speed limit, she'd been careful. No, it wasn't about speeding, not this time. It was about something far more important, far more dangerous. Something no one could ever know. Something she had kept hidden for years. She saw the officer's silhouette grow larger in the side mirror as the patrol car pulled up behind hers, the sound of its engine purring softly as it came to a stop. Her mind raced. Her breath caught in her throat. The officer was getting out of the car. Stay calm, she told herself, her voice trembling with the effort. Stay calm. She reached for the glove compartment, her fingers feeling cold and stiff as she fumbled with the latch. She pulled out her ID, forcing herself to breathe evenly as she prepared for the worst. The officer approached her door, his face hidden in the shadows of the night. His footsteps were deliberate, heavy against the pavement, as if he was aware of the tension building in the air. He stopped in front of her window, pausing for a moment, then knocked twice, sharply. License and registration, he commanded, his voice firm, with an air of authority that only added to the rising anxiety in her chest. Her hands shook as she passed the documents through the window. The officer took them without a word, his eyes briefly scanning the name on her license. He didn't say anything for a long moment, but she could feel his gaze linger on her, almost as if he were looking for something else. Something beyond the ordinary. I was just heading home, she said, her voice unsteady despite her attempt to keep it calm. Long night. Long drive. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at her, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. His eyes seemed to flicker with some silent recognition, though she couldn't understand why. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his tone now softer. Where exactly are you coming from? Her heart raced, her thoughts spinning in every direction. It was a simple question, but it felt like a trap. She could tell he was searching for something in her response. Her mind scrambled for an answer that wouldn't give anything away. Just a work trip. Nothing special, she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed her. She could feel the tension in her throat. The officer studied her for a moment longer, his face unreadable. Then, without warning, he glanced at the documents again. The papers rustled in his hands. His eyes narrowed, and something in his posture shifted. He seemed confused. Wait here, he said suddenly, his voice clipped. Don't move. She sat frozen in her seat, her mind spinning, her breath shallow. What was going on? What had he found? Was it something on her record? Or something else? Her hands were slick with sweat, her thoughts a whirlwind. She didn't know how much longer she could stay calm, how much longer she could hold it together. Minutes ticked by, though it felt like hours. Her eyes were locked on the officer's figure as he made his way back to the patrol car. She could see him talking to his partner, the conversation low and urgent. Then, after a long pause, he turned back toward her, his face grim, his movements deliberate. He returned to her side of the car, but this time, his eyes were different. His expression had softened, but there was something in his gaze, a quiet uncertainty, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. He didn't speak immediately, just handed her back her documents. She took them with trembling hands, her mind still racing. Miss, the officer said, his voice steady but with a hint of something else. I need you to step out of the car. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a good sign. What had he discovered? What had gone wrong? Is there a problem? She asked, though she already knew the answer. It was all over. Her secret, her carefully crafted life, it was all crumbling before her eyes. The officer didn't respond, just motioned for her to step out of the car. Reluctantly, she obeyed. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, as if they might give way at any moment. He led her to the back of the patrol car, where his partner stood waiting. There was an air of something she couldn't name, suspense, maybe. Fear, definitely. The second officer was looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, his brow furrowed in confusion. What's happening? She demanded, though she knew deep down she wasn't prepared for the answer. Her voice cracked, the fear overwhelming her composure. The first officer didn't answer right away. He only handed his partner a small, thin piece of paper. She didn't have to read it to know what it was. Whatever it said, it had changed everything. The officer's partner read it quickly, then turned back to look at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Wait a second, the second officer said, his voice full of confusion. You're the one. The first officer cleared his throat, his face pale, as he tried to maintain his professionalism. But it was clear something was off. It's her. We found her. Found her. What did that mean? She felt the blood drain from her face. Found her. Who was she? The first officer's gaze flickered back to her, then lowered. We need to make a call. This isn't just a regular stop. Her heart pounded in her chest as the second officer stepped aside, pulling out his radio. Dispatch to Unit 5 to 6, do you have confirmation on the name? Over, he said, his voice low but urgent. She could barely breathe. The air was thick with tension. Who was she to them? Why had they found her now? The longer she stood there, the more surreal it all seemed. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was slipping out of her hands. The radio crackled again. The officer's eyes widened as he listened. It's her. Confirmed. We found her. Her stomach turned, a mixture of fear and confusion settling in. Her heart hammered in her chest, her head spinning. The officer glanced at her, his expression hardening. You don't know who you are, do you? He said, his voice low. Her mind reeled. What was going on? What was he talking about? She had no answers. Only questions. But before she could speak, he finished what he had started. Miss, we've just found out, you're our new chief. Her heart was still racing, each beat pounding in her chest like a drum. The weight of the officer's words hung in the air between them, suffocating. You're our new chief. Those words had sliced through her like a knife. She hadn't been prepared for this. She hadn't been prepared for any of this. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the situation, trying to push away the fog of confusion clouding her mind. The officers seemed to think they had uncovered something monumental, something world-changing, but what did that mean for her? What had they uncovered? I don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. Her throat felt tight, her words barely audible. What do you mean, Chief? I'm nobody. I'm just, me. The officer who had first stopped her, Officer Davis, looked at her with a mix of pity and something else she couldn't quite read. The second officer, a younger man with a sharp face and weary eyes, was still holding the radio, his hand frozen in place as he awaited instructions. It's her, the second officer repeated, more to himself than anyone else. I thought it was a mistake. But it's her. The first officer, Davis, sighed, his expression hardening with resolve. You don't know what you've been walking into, do you? His voice had softened, but there was an edge to it now, something that made her spine straighten, that made the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. The second officer stepped forward, still holding the radio. We need to make a full report. This isn't something we can handle by ourselves. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had no idea what they were talking about, no idea what they were referring to. But it was clear they thought she had answers, that somehow, she was supposed to know exactly what was going on. Her mind raced back to the moment when they'd stopped her, when the officer had first asked her about her work trip. She had said nothing special, but maybe, just maybe, there was something more she had been hiding without realizing it. Her breath caught in her throat as the younger officer turned back to her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Where were you really coming from? Her stomach twisted at the question, her instincts screaming at her to stay calm, to keep her answers simple. She couldn't afford to slip up now. But the truth was, she had no idea how she could keep lying when her world was spinning out of control. I told you, she said, her voice trembling. I was just driving. I'm coming from a work trip. Davis raised an eyebrow. A work trip? To where? She didn't have an answer. She had no specific destination to give, no real justification for the vague explanation she had given. But before she could say anything else, Davis held up a hand. Forget it. We've got the details we need. He turned and began to walk away, motioning for her to follow. Come with us. You need to see something. The second officer, his radio still in hand, fell in line behind her as they walked toward the patrol car. She glanced back at the dark stretch of road, wondering if this was all some kind of mistake. Surely, there was some misunderstanding. She was nobody. She was just an ordinary woman driving home. Why had they suddenly unearthed something she didn't even know existed? As she climbed into the back of the patrol car, her mind continued to race. What had they found? And how did it all tie back to her? She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just walked into something far bigger than she could handle. Something that wasn't just about her, but about something much more dangerous, something she had been unknowingly a part of for years. The drive was silent, the officers exchanging quiet words as they drove, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. She could only hear the hum of the tires on the road and the muffled conversations in the front seat. They had left her with nothing but her own thoughts and a sense of growing dread. The city lights blurred past, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the windshield. Finally, the patrol car pulled into a parking lot, and they stopped in front of a low, unassuming building. Her heart dropped into her stomach. What was going on? Was this a police station? Or was it something else? Out, Davis ordered, his voice curt. You need to come inside. Reluctantly, she got out of the car, her legs feeling shaky as she followed the officers through the dark parking lot. They led her into the building, the doors creaking open as they entered. The interior was dimly lit, filled with the scent of stale air and fluorescent lights. There was a long hallway ahead, lined with doors on either side. It felt eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. They led her down the hallway and stopped in front of a door marked, Office of Internal Affairs. Her stomach lurched. Internal Affairs? Why would she be taken there? What was going on? Davis knocked once, then opened the door. Inside, a man sat behind a desk, his face obscured by the dim light from the desk lamp. He was scribbling something on a piece of paper, but when he heard the door open, he looked up. His eyes flickered with recognition, and he stood quickly, the chair scraping noisily against the floor. Officer Davis, I presume, he asked, his voice smooth and professional. And the lady? The young officer nodded. It's her. We found her. The man behind the desk raised an eyebrow, then turned to her. I see. Please, take a seat. She hesitated for a moment, glancing around the room. The walls were bare, except for a few framed photographs. The man's eyes were fixed on her now, studying her with a level of scrutiny that made her skin crawl. Do you know who we are? The man asked, his voice calm but firm. She shook her head, unsure of what to say. She had no idea what was happening. She had no idea why she was here or what they wanted from her. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're the people who've been looking for you." "Looking for me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why?" He gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, her legs shaky as she took the chair in front of his desk. He sat back in his own chair, his hands folded in front of him. "The thing is," he said, his tone almost conversational, "you've been a part of something far bigger than you realize." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The man didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her for a long moment, like he was sizing her up, deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're not just anyone," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You're not just a random woman who happened to get stopped on the side of the road. No, you're someone important. Someone we've been searching for." Her mind was racing, her thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. She felt dizzy. What was he talking about? Why was he saying these things? What had she done? "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice now shaking. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled faintly. "What we want from you is simple, the truth." And with that, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. The room felt colder now. The man behind the desk leaned forward slightly, his steely eyes still locked on hers. It wasn't just the temperature that made her shiver, it was the chilling weight of his words. The truth, he had said, but what truth could she possibly have? She was an ordinary woman, nothing special. So why were they acting like she was the key to something monumental? Her mind raced with unanswered questions, but she couldn't form a coherent thought. It felt as though she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and each passing second threatened to send her spiraling into a world she wasn't ready for. The man behind the desk, his name was Agent Harris, she learned from his badge, watched her intently as she tried to steady her breath. He was calm, too calm, and it unnerved her. The younger officer, still standing by the door, crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, becoming thicker, more suffocating with each passing moment. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The pressure in her chest was unbearable, and her mind was whirling with the need for answers. She had to know why they had dragged her into this web of confusion. Agent Harris finally broke the silence. "I'm sure you're wondering what this is all about. Let me explain." His voice was smooth, calculated, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. Something more dangerous. She could feel it in her bones. "You see," Harris began, his hands resting lightly on the desk in front of him, "we've been tracking certain individuals for a while now. People who, unknowingly, play key roles in a much bigger picture. We've been looking for someone with your particular set of skills." She blinked, the words barely registering in her mind. Skills? What skills? She was just an ordinary woman, working an ordinary job in a city that felt small and unimportant. What did he mean by skills? Harris continued, oblivious to her confusion. "You've been involved in something for a long time, whether you realize it or not. And now, it's time for you to step into the role you were always meant to play." "What role?" Her voice came out shaky, and she felt a lump form in her throat. The walls of the room seemed to close in on her, and she couldn't breathe. She felt trapped, cornered by the unknown, by forces she couldn't comprehend. Harris glanced at the younger officer, who nodded and left the room without a word. He shut the door behind him, leaving the two of them alone. Harris shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. He didn't seem in any hurry to reveal more. Instead, he watched her with a curious, almost amused expression. The silence stretched again, and she could feel her pulse quickening in her neck. "Do you know what an operative is?" Harris finally asked. The word hit her like a punch to the gut. "Operative?" she echoed, her voice thick with confusion. "What are you talking about?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "An operative is someone who operates, moves within a system, a network, a cause, without fully understanding their role in it. They are essential pieces in a larger game, and they don't even know it. She stared at him, the meaning of his words barely beginning to sink in. But I'm not, her throat tightened, and she had to force herself to swallow. I'm not involved in anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Ah, Harris said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But you are. And that's exactly what we've been trying to uncover. You were always part of the plan, whether you knew it or not. Her stomach turned. This couldn't be real. She was just a woman, living her life, doing her job. She wasn't some secret agent or covert operative in a high-stakes mission. But Harris wasn't finished. We've been monitoring certain activities, certain patterns. And your name kept coming up. Over and over again. We thought it was a mistake at first, but then we began to see the connections. Pieces began to fall into place. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, each word he spoke sinking deeper into her consciousness. The more he spoke, the more she felt like she was losing her grip on reality. I don't understand, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. What connections? What are you talking about? Harris's gaze softened for just a moment, as if he were weighing his next words carefully. The connections are between you and a network we've been tracking for years. You've been walking through life, unaware, but you've been connected to this for a long time. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. What network? What did he mean, connected? She couldn't make sense of any of it. The panic inside her surged, threatening to overtake her. Listen, she said, her voice rising now, more desperate. I don't know anything about any network. I'm just an ordinary woman. I don't know who you think I am, but you've got the wrong person. Harris didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly stood up from his desk and walked around to her side of the room. His movements were deliberate, controlled. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost coaxing. You've been a part of this network your whole life. Your father was, too. Her breath caught in her throat. What? Harris's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something almost regretful. Your father was one of our highest-ranking operatives. He worked with us for years. But he disappeared when you were young. We thought he'd been compromised, but now we're starting to realize he was always trying to protect you. The words felt like a slap in the face. Her father? An operative? The idea was so absurd it was almost laughable. But Harris wasn't joking. He wasn't lying. Your father, he continued, left behind a series of notes, clues about you. We didn't know what to make of them at first, but as time went on, we began to piece them together. A cold shiver ran through her body. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? She demanded, her voice shaking. Why am I just finding out now? Harris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out a file, thick, worn, and labeled with her name in bold letters. Her breath quickened as he placed it in front of her. This file contains everything you need to know about your father's work. And about yours. Her hands trembled as she opened the file, flipping through the pages. Each one was filled with cryptic notes, diagrams, and photographs, things that made no sense. But as she read, it became clear that they were all connected to her. She couldn't understand how, but the connections were there, lurking beneath the surface. And then, at the very end of the file, she saw it, a photograph of her father, standing beside a group of people she didn't recognize. One of them was smiling at the camera, and another held a clipboard. Her father's face was unreadable, his eyes cold, distant. Underneath the photo were words that made her heart stop. She is the key. Protect her. She closed the file with a snap, the realization crashing down on her. She wasn't just a bystander in this game. She wasn't just an ordinary woman who had gotten caught up in something bigger than her. She was the key, the missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed. Harris watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "It's time you learned the truth about who you are. And about the role you're going to play." The file lay in front of her, its contents heavy with the weight of truths she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. She'd always known there was something off about her family, about the shadow that seemed to hang over them, but she never imagined it could be something like this. A covert network? Her father, an operative? It felt like the entire world she knew had just shifted beneath her feet, and now she was scrambling to find her footing. Harris sat across from her, waiting, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. He wasn't in a hurry to explain anything more. It was almost as if he was letting the information sink in, watching her process everything. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her every reaction, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him. Not yet. Her hands trembled as she picked up the file again, flipping through the pages more carefully this time. Her father's name appeared repeatedly, but so did her own. There were scribbled notes in the margins, fragments of conversations, snippets of thoughts. It was all pieced together like a puzzle, but one she couldn't yet comprehend. She is the key. Protect her. The words haunted her. What did they mean? How was she supposed to protect herself from something she didn't even understand? How could she be part of something so dangerous, so clandestine, and still be clueless about it? The door opened suddenly, and a woman entered, carrying a tray of coffee. She looked young, maybe in her late 20s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She set the tray down on the table between them and stood back, her gaze flicking between the two of them before settling on Harris. "Anything else you need, sir?" the woman asked, her voice quiet but firm. "No, not yet," Harris replied without taking his eyes off the file. The woman nodded and left the room, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was oppressive. She felt trapped in this room, in this moment, as if there were no way out. The walls felt like they were closing in on her, and she wanted nothing more than to leave. But something told her that wasn't an option. Not anymore. Finally, Harris spoke. "I know this is a lot to take in. But you need to understand that your father's disappearance wasn't random. He didn't just walk away from you, from the life he built. He left because he knew something was coming. He was trying to protect you." She looked up, finally meeting his gaze. His eyes were unwavering, as though he knew exactly what she was feeling. "Protect me from what?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "What could possibly be so dangerous that my father had to leave everything behind?" Harris sighed, rubbing his forehead as though the weight of the situation was beginning to wear on him as well. "There's a group, a network, working in the shadows. They've been operating for years, manipulating events, controlling people, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Your father got involved when he realized what they were doing. And when he learned how deeply entrenched they were in society, he knew he had to protect you from them." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What does that have to do with me? Why would they want anything to do with me?" Harris hesitated, then leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "Because you're not just anyone. Your father wasn't just an operative, he was part of a select group of people who were chosen for their unique abilities, their influence. And you're the key to stopping them." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, I'm the key?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris's eyes softened, but there was no comfort in his gaze. "It's not about what you've done, or what you've known. It's about who you are, your bloodline. Your father was part of a network that worked to control the most influential people in the world. And you're his daughter. That connection is what makes you the key." The weight of his words sank in, but she couldn't fully grasp them. Her mind was still reeling from the information she'd learned, and now he was telling her that she was connected to some shadowy group that had been pulling the strings for decades. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "How can I be the key? What do I have to do with any of this?" Harris reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on the file. There are pieces of this puzzle that are only just beginning to fall into place. But the truth is, your father's disappearance was no accident. He had to go into hiding to protect you from people who would stop at nothing to use you as a pawn in their game. The realization was slow to come, but it was starting to take root. Her father's absence, the secrecy, the cryptic notes, none of it had been random. It had all been part of a larger plan, a plan to protect her from something far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "I don't want to be part of this," she said suddenly, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. "I don't want anything to do with whatever this is." Harris leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I understand how you feel. But you don't have a choice. The moment you found out about your father's involvement, the moment you opened that file, you became a part of this whether you like it or not." Her heart pounded in her chest as she processed his words. There was no running from this. No way to turn back. She was already in too deep. "I'll give you time," Harris said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Time to think, time to process. But I need you to understand this, there are people out there who will stop at nothing to control you, to use you as a tool in their game. And if you don't take control now, if you don't take action, they will. And they'll use you against everything you care about." She sat back, her mind whirling. The room seemed to spin as the weight of the situation crashed down on her. Her father's disappearance, the cryptic messages, the hidden network, it was all coming together in a way that felt impossible, yet undeniable. "I need answers," she said, her voice steadying as she found a flicker of resolve deep within herself. "I need to know what's really going on. I need to understand who I'm up against." Harris nodded. "You will. But be prepared. What you learn won't be easy. It won't be comfortable. But it's the only way to make sure you don't lose everything." She didn't know if she was ready for what was coming, but she knew one thing for sure, there was no going back. The life she had known, the simple, quiet existence she had built for herself, it was all slipping away, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. And she had to find a way to survive it. The figure at the door didn't say a word. They didn't need to. The weight of their presence was enough to silence the room. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs as her eyes locked with the stranger's. Harris, ever the composed one, was the first to speak. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something that hinted at the tension beneath the surface. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his words clipped. The stranger, tall, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through her, didn't move. They simply stood there, watching her. The silence between them stretched long, filled with unspoken understanding, and it made her skin crawl. She wanted to turn away, to escape, but she couldn't. Something told her that this person was the key to everything, the person who held the answers she desperately needed. The figure finally spoke, their voice low and steady. "It's time to stop hiding, Harris." She didn't recognize the voice, but there was a familiarity to it that made her stomach twist. Was this someone from her father's past? Someone who knew more than she ever could about the tangled web she'd just stepped into? Harris stood slowly, his hand resting on the table, as if ready for whatever might come next. "We agreed on this," he said, his voice firm, but there was an unmistakable flicker of something in his eyes. Was it fear? Worry? "I told you to wait." The stranger's gaze shifted to her. "You've been keeping things from her, Harris," they said, their voice rising just enough to break the quiet tension in the room. "She deserves to know everything." Everything. The word echoed in her mind, and her pulse quickened. She hadn't thought she could feel more lost, but the truth seemed to be slipping further away, like sand through her fingers. What had Harris been hiding from her? Why did this person feel the need to reveal things she wasn't ready for? "I know what you're trying to do," Harris said, his voice growing colder. "But now is not the time." The stranger, without another word, stepped into the room, closing the door behind them. The movement was deliberate, measured, and as they crossed the room, their eyes never left hers. The stranger reached into their coat and pulled out a small, black object, a phone. No, not quite. The moment it hit the table, it beeped once, then hummed quietly. A live feed, flickering to life on the screen. Her mind raced. Who was this person? What was going on? Harris looked at the screen for a brief second, his face tightening. This wasn't part of the plan. It's happening now, Harris. Whether you like it or not, the stranger replied, their gaze now fixed on her. We've run out of time. She didn't have the courage to ask any more questions. Every second that passed, every new revelation, felt like a punch to the gut. Her father's disappearance, the cryptic messages, Harris's cryptic warnings, was all of this leading to this moment? What is this? She finally asked, her voice a strained whisper. The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, they tapped the screen, and it flickered again. This time, the feed cleared, revealing a blurry image, an aerial shot of a facility, surrounded by thick forests. There was a red dot blinking on the map, but the picture was grainy, barely enough to make out any details. What is this? She repeated, more forcefully now, her confusion morphing into desperation. The facility is where it all started, the stranger said. Their voice was cold, devoid of the warmth she expected. Where your father's involvement began, and where you'll finish what he started. The words hung in the air, like an unsolved riddle that she couldn't seem to make sense of. What did they mean? What was her father's involvement? And why was she being dragged into this now? You're not ready for this, Harris finally spoke up, his voice tinged with frustration. But the stranger ignored him, leaning closer to her. You think you're alone in this, but you're not. Your father was a part of something bigger than anyone ever realized. And now it's time for you to take his place. Her stomach twisted again, the pressure in her chest mounting as she tried to process everything she was hearing. Take his place. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. The stranger's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of empathy breaking through their otherwise hard exterior. You don't have to understand everything right now. But what you need to know is that you've already been marked. The people your father was running from, they're still looking for you. And the longer you wait to take control, the harder it will be to escape. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them she was done, that she didn't want any part of this twisted reality they were trying to thrust upon her. But something stopped her. It was that nagging feeling at the back of her mind, that feeling that she didn't have a choice anymore. What exactly am I supposed to do? Her voice cracked, betraying the vulnerability she was desperately trying to hide. Where do I even begin? Harris's eyes met hers then, and for the first time since their conversation began, he didn't look like a man who had all the answers. He looked worried. You begin by facing the truth, he said softly. You're not just a victim of circumstance. You're part of this story. And you're the only one who can rewrite it. The stranger stepped back, pulling out a thick folder and sliding it across the table toward her. You need to read this. Every page will answer questions you haven't even thought to ask. Her hands shook as she reached for the folder, its weight feeling strangely heavy, as though it were a burden she wasn't yet ready to bear. But there was no turning back. She opened it slowly, scanning the pages. It was a timeline. A list of events, places, people. Names that were foreign to her, locations she had never heard of, and missions her father had been involved in, all connected to one central goal, control. The feeling of dread deepened as she read the last line. The final confrontation will take place on the night of the full moon. Your father knew the stakes. He never expected you to be involved. But now, there's no other choice. The words felt like an omen, and they only deepened her unease. What had her father been caught up in? And why was she now being forced into the same dangerous game? As the stranger walked towards the door, they turned back one last time. You don't have much time. The people who were after your father will be coming for you soon. And when they do, you'll need to be ready. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving her alone with the overwhelming weight of the information she had just uncovered. Her mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place, yet, the more she understood, the more questions arose. What was the truth? Who could she trust? And when the final moment came, would she be able to rise above the darkness her father had left her to face? The phone vibrated once more, shaking in her hands as she stared at the cryptic message on the screen. They're coming for you. Don't trust anyone. The words seemed to burn into her mind, their weight more suffocating than anything she'd ever encountered. She had been prepared for a lot of things, confusion, fear, uncertainty, but this? This was something different. It wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about her, her future, and the danger she was about to face. A new reality was closing in around her, one that had been hidden just beyond the veil of her understanding. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the phone screen to respond. But she hesitated. What could she even say? Who was this person? Was the message real? Her father had been deep in something dangerous, but to this degree, could it be that she was already too deep into the same web? She glanced at Harris, who stood near the table, his posture tense but his face unreadable. His silence wasn't comforting. It made the pit in her stomach grow larger. Harris had always been a man of few words, but this silence felt different. He wasn't the same man who had offered protection and guidance. Now, he was a part of the problem, or so it seemed. The weight of the unknown, combined with the eerie uncertainty that clung to the air, was beginning to drown her in anxiety. What does this mean, Harris? Her voice shook, betraying her calm demeanor. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you prepare me for this? Harris took a deep breath, his eyes briefly flicking to the phone in her hand. You weren't ready. You couldn't have been. You don't understand the full scope of this yet, but I promise you, it's too late to back out now. We don't have a choice. But I don't even know what this is, she snapped, her frustration bubbling over. What's going on? What's this facility you've been talking about? What was my father involved in? Harris's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight, visibly uncomfortable, as if the very mention of her father's involvement in whatever was happening now was an itch he couldn't scratch. I didn't want to drag you into this, but, he paused, clearly wrestling with his own emotions. Your father was connected to a group that worked in the shadows, a group that's still out there. The facility, what I'm about to tell you, it's where everything started. Where it all began. She took a step closer to him, her frustration mixing with growing fear. What group? What happened to him? Why was he hiding everything from me? Harris finally met her gaze. It wasn't about hiding things from you. It was about protecting you. Your father knew the risks of what he was involved in. He knew the people, the forces he was up against, and the moment they learned about you, it was too dangerous. He didn't want you anywhere near this life. But it wasn't just the truth of the matter that hurt, it was the realization that he hadn't trusted her enough to be a part of it. To be part of his world. She thought of her father, of their time together before everything started to spiral out of control. She'd known he was keeping things from her, but to know it was because he'd been trying to protect her, to keep her safe, it only made things harder to understand. I thought you were my protector, she whispered, more to herself than to him. But all you've done is kept me in the dark. Harris looked away, his expression pained. I never wanted to keep you in the dark, but you have to understand, you can't just jump into this. It's bigger than anything you've ever imagined. She didn't have the time or the patience for this anymore. She was done asking questions and receiving half-answers. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to figure out what her father had left behind, she had to face it head-on. Tell me everything, she said firmly, her voice shaking with the force of her determination. Everything. Harris exhaled deeply and slowly began to speak, each word a revelation she hadn't been ready to hear. The group your father was involved with, what he uncovered, was part of a global network. They weren't just collecting information, they were controlling it. They were pulling the strings from behind the scenes, manipulating governments, corporations, even people like you and me. Her blood ran cold. Controlling information. The phrase echoed in her mind as she processed the implications. What are they doing now? What are they planning? They want to control everything. The facility we talked about. It's their headquarters. They're planning something big, something that could change the course of history. And your father, he found a way to stop them. But he didn't make it in time. That's where you come in. She recoiled at the mention of her father's failed attempt to stop whatever was coming. What do you mean? How am I supposed to stop them if he couldn't? You already are. Harris's voice softened, but his words hit like a punch to her gut. They're already coming for you, just like they came for your father. But this time, you have a chance. You can do what he couldn't, finish what he started. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. She felt the truth of them settle deep inside her. She had no choice but to follow the path her father had started, even if it meant stepping into a world she had no understanding of. Then, the phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and saw another message. Her heart skipped a beat. Don't trust Harris. It's already too late. Her breath caught in her throat. The stranger had warned her, but she hadn't been ready to. Listen. She turned her gaze to Harris, the trust she had once placed in him beginning to fracture. Could he be the one she couldn't trust? Was he leading her into a trap? Or was this all part of the larger game she had found herself caught in? Harris must have noticed the change in her demeanor. What is it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers trembled as she handed him the phone. The message seemed to hit him harder than it had hit her. His face paled, and his eyes widened for just a fraction of a second, an involuntary reaction that betrayed him. Who sent this? He demanded, his voice tinged with panic. I don't know, she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear in her chest. But it doesn't change the fact that something is wrong. Harris took a step back, his mind clearly racing. We don't have much time. If they're already onto us, onto you, there's no turning back. We need to go to the facility now. The facility. Her mind screamed for answers, but all she could do was nod. The truth, however much of it there was left to uncover, was too close now. Too pressing. Come on, Harris urged. We're running out of time. And then, without another word, he turned and headed for the door. The heavy weight of the situation bore down on her chest as she followed him. She had no idea what she was walking into, but there was no going back now. They stepped outside, the cool night air washing over them as the sound of the city felt distant, disconnected from the chaos that was about to unfold. She could feel it, the pull of fate, the pressure of her father's legacy, and the storm that was just beginning. But as they drove through the winding streets, her thoughts kept drifting back to the message on the phone. Don't trust Harris. Her mind spun with questions. Could she really trust him? Was he hiding something? And if so, what was it? But there was no time to dig deeper into the mystery. There were more pressing matters at hand, matters that might just decide her fate. And as they reached the edge of the city, where the facility stood dark and foreboding in the distance, the world she knew seemed to slip away, leaving only the unknown ahead.